What are the types of different situations people can confront when they're trying to hire a firm? Like, we heard that a lot of firms handle their clients in a lot of different ways. Like, what are the different ways that a client could, what type of experiences could they have, and how does it differ with you?
Yeah, I mean, like with any business, right? You could have different experiences, good, bad, or otherwise. With criminal defense firms, particularly in San Diego, it's all over the map. And we hear that from our clients. Some will call and they'll say, wait, what do you mean you want to ask me questions about where I'm from and my background? We're like, yeah, we do. We're potentially going to represent you. We need to know you better than anyone in that courtroom in order to effectively represent you, right? Because you go in court and you see attorneys fumbling around. Judge DA is like, tell me about your client. And like, I don't know. I think he's 29. No, excuse me. He's 46. He's, whatever. And it's like, really? It's like, I don't care if you're getting paid, 50 grand on a case or if you're getting paid $120 an hour, whatever the case may be. That's a bad look, right? So you'll see some firms that'll call, hey, okay, you got a DUI. Okay, that DUI is in Chula Vista. All right, cool. We're going to charge you $7,500. Think about it from a client's perspective. It's like, that's all I am? A name, a charge? You're going to lump me in and treat me like everybody else? And if they're not thinking about it at that point, they probably will realize that soon after, right? And why would you spend money? Even if not, right? You can't afford an attorney, you go court appointed to counsel. Why would you want to be treated, whether a private attorney or not? Why would you want to be treated by that person? The same way the cops probably treated you, the same way the system probably has treated you, or certainly will try and treat you, as a name and a number and lump you in like everybody else, right? That's not justice. That's not what people pay for. That's not what people deserve.
Do you find it difficult, like when you are doing that kind of interview process or what have you, do you find it difficult to get the full story from clients? Do they like hold back a lot in that process?
Yeah, it's always difficult to try and get the full story, right? For a couple of reasons. One is primarily it's a trust issue, right? And that's part of it too. And that's part of the effective nature of connecting with someone first on a human level and not get into, well, what would I have seen if I was there? What are the police reports going to say? Even worse when attorneys ask their clients, well, what did you do? Or did you do it? It's like, no, what are you doing, right? But you got to connect with someone on a one-to-one basis first to establish that trust. And given the nature of certain cases, given the nature of certain people's backgrounds, some traumas they may have experienced in their life, that trust always doesn't come on the initial consult. It might not even come after they hire you right away, but it has to come over time, right, in order to most effectively represent someone. But you got to do that through work, right? Your client's got to see you work. You say you're going to call them at a certain time, you got to call them at a certain time. You say you're going to see them next weekend at a jail, you better show up, or you better have a good reason. Tell their mom, tell their dad that you're not going to be able to make it in advance, right? It's about respect. It's about trust, because for so many people caught up in the criminal justice system, they may not know a lot of people that believed in them. They may not know a lot of people that were reliable and said what they're going to do and then actually followed through on it. So that's important. That's a big way to build trust.
How often are you interfacing with the client's family or other people besides them?
Yeah, I mean, we're dealing with the client's family a lot, especially clients that we have that are in custody. And here at our firm, what we'll do is we'll set it up in a way where we always ask for one designated point person so they could disseminate and distribute that information to the rest of the family. Because what we want to make sure is that we're getting the family the information they need, that the client, most importantly, is comfortable with us sharing. But also, we don't want to create a situation where, speaking to client's mom from 3 to 4 on Tuesday, and then client's girlfriend calls at 5 o'clock on Wednesday and says, what's going on with my boyfriend's case? Right? Because then what we're doing is we're spending more time just saying the same message over and over again and having less face time with our actual client, less time putting our head into discovery, strategizing on what we can do to help that individual.
What are the perks of hiring a personal or a private attorney versus getting a public defender?
There are many benefits, right, to go the route of a private attorney if it's the right attorney for you. If it's a private attorney that knows what they're doing, that's experienced, that cares, that has the resources. Okay, many people have this myth out there that, I'm going to get a private attorney. There's no way I'm going with a public defender. But when you unpack that a little bit, the reasons really aren't sound ones. It's a lot of times it's misinformation that are not true, particularly here in San Diego. We tell clients, we put it out in our marketing, we tell every client we talk to, if you're on the cusp of hiring a private attorney or if you qualify for the court-appointed public defender's office, understand this, that it's our firm's position that an average public defender is better than 90% of the private defense bar, just by the nature of that in and of itself, because they have the experience that so many private firms don't have, whether they don't do it in the volume, they don't handle serious cases, or they're not necessarily criminal defense attorneys. They might only be criminal defense attorneys certain days of the week. Now, the major benefit, though, is the ability to have conversations, long conversations in person, at the office, on nights, on weekends, whatever the case may be that works with your schedule as a potential client, our schedule as the attorney, and a lower caseload, that's just fact. But it is important to understand that if you're going to hire a private attorney, you want to make sure you hire the right one. Don't just work off the assumption they're going to be better than what you're getting court appointed, because more often than not, that's not the case, especially here in San Diego.
So if, let's say I'm out and about and somebody's posturing to me, making me feel threatened. And because I feel threatened, and instead of waiting to be attacked, I go ahead and initiate first. Well, does that count as self-defense?
Well, it depends, right? The circumstances, where this is at, who this other person is, right? You know, if you're 6'1" and 250 pounds, and you're saying that some 75-year-old woman's posturing you, and you cold cock her in the head, you got a problem there, right? That's not self-defense or defense of others. So the circumstances, what you knew about that other individual, even if it's not true, right? So if someone told you, hey, that person carries a gun, or that person said they're looking to fight tonight, that could be used as a reasonable belief in the need for you to defend yourself as opposed to some stranger. Totality of the evidence, all those factors go into it. That's the stuff that the district attorney or the prosecutor should examine. That's certainly the stuff that your attorney should examine as well.
If I'm a male, I've been drinking, and then this girl takes advantage of me and has sex with me, can I press charges on her?
Well, here's the thing, right? Whenever you're dealing with sexual relationships, whether it's man, woman, woman, whatever, right? There's a couple of things at play. One is you need to have consent. So there could be charges like forcible rape, which is the traditional, like, hey, someone held you down, stranger rape, that type of stuff. And then there's also rape by intoxication, or basically where you're so messed up and so out of it that you're incapable of consenting. And we're starting to see that, at least in my career, right, since 2007, more and more and more, where the prosecutor for a while would charge them interchangeably, would charge forcible rape. And well, if we can't get the forcible rape, we'll get him on or get her on the rape of an intoxicated person. Okay, so people get caught up more on the rape of an intoxicated or incapacitated person because of their own mouth. And they're talking about like, yeah, you know, I do remember helping them off the floor when they passed out or fell before we had sex. You know, I do remember wiping the vomit off of them before I carried them into my bed and had sex with them. First of all, those things are not cool. It's not right morally, certainly not right legally. And again, what have you done? You've talked yourself into sex offender registration. You've talked yourself into potentially a state prison commitment, and you've talked yourself into a very serious criminal case.
Have you ever encountered a situation where a woman forced herself onto a man?
Yeah,
with charges were pressed.
Without question, we've seen it, right? It's not as common as the other way around. If it's a man taking advantage or accused of being taken advantage of a woman, but we have seen it twofold. We've seen it one in cases that have been charged, and we've also seen it in cases clients that we've represented that have had that trauma inflicted on them as males by their wives, that have been sexually abused by their wives in a way where they weren't comfortable having relations either at all, or certainly not at the frequency of that other individual, right? And at first glance, right, you're like, oh, what's the problem, right? What are you complaining about, right? There's so many people that may want to be in that situation. But again, each case is different. Each person's background is different. And what may be normal and what may be encouraged for someone else may not be for a different person. And that goes back to what we always talk about, which is getting to understand your client as an individual, going back to day one, because what may be good for me, what may be nothing that I could just dust off my shoulders may send someone under the table crying. Vice versa, something that may tug on my heartstrings as an individual based on what I've seen in my life may be nothing compared to somebody else because you're like, that was a normal Saturday for me, right? Each case is different.
Would you defend, if there was a murderer and he murdered like your mom, would you defend him?
Well, I mean, I couldn't, right? Because one is I'd probably be a witness against it. But you know, the real thing is to understand, as criminal defense attorneys, it's always emotional, right? Anyone tells you, well, I'm numb to everything. It's like they're lying, or if they are, that's kind of concerning. The reality is that we all have emotions, we all have feelings. It's to try and keep that even keel and to only utilize it if it's to your client's advantage, right? Or do that stuff in private or with your firm, with your family, whatever the case may be. It's also important that we identify our own checks and what works, right? And there are certain cases or certain times of our lives or certain situations that may hit too close to home. And it's important as a professional, and certainly as a trusted professional by these people who are coming to us in their time of need, when they're looking for someone to help protect their life, to be able to say, hey, you know what? We might not be the best person for you for this case, or I may not be the best attorney at my firm, but let me put you in contact with someone who's going to do as good, if not a better job. So it's that self-check, that self-regulation to be in touch with what we're doing on it, right? Because the last thing you want, and we see it way, way too often, is in court, and you could tell that the attorney just is so personally offended, or something about that attorney's background and that case is holding them back from representing their client to the best of their abilities. They're referring to their client as an idiot in public. They're playing the game that sometimes we see, unfortunately, the sheriff's department does, district attorneys do, judges sometimes do, even worse, defense attorneys, when they refer to in custody human beings as bodies. They say, the body's up. And I will always correct them for that, because they are human beings, right? It's like, can you imagine that? Can you imagine being a family member and you're like, hey, my son, my brother, my father is facing the rest of their life for a crime that they did or didn't commit. We're going to put all our faith in you and your firm. And you're going to use words like body, the same way the DA does, the same way the cops do. It's not right that they do it. It's even worse when a defense attorney does.
Are there any cases that you wouldn't take?
Any case that I wouldn't take, I have not had a case that I looked at where it wasn't an inherent conflict, right? It wasn't like, oh, as a witness, or I knew one of the parties or something like that, right? Within criminal defense, within San Diego, state, mostly all federal, I have not experienced since 2007 a case that I'm like, I can't touch this. Obviously, I have people in the firm that have done that, and I commend them for that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's like, hey, I'll take it. A lot of times people told me when I was younger in my career and did not have a family, and they would say, wait, you like doing these types of cases, you want to get these types of cases, wait till you have a family. And I always thought about that. I'm like, are they going to be right? Right? I mean, these people who live through it, do they know something that I don't? But the bottom line was this, right? That assumes I condone that conduct that my clients were alleged to begin with. Doing something to a child, a defenseless child, is equally as wrong and horrible to me at 26 than it is at 43. It's a different story if you condone that type of conduct. And I always look back at that and actually resent those people that told me that, because it was almost an insult. It was an insult that I was only doing that because I didn't have a kid of my own at the time.
You show so much, like you're such a respectful guy. You show the judge respect, you show the prosecutors respect, you show the police department respect, you show your clients respect, you show everyone respect. Isn't a criminal defense attorney supposed to hate the prosecutor, supposed to hate the police, treat them as like they're the opposition or they're the enemy? They're the ones trying to lock up your client, they're trying to set your client up. So I guess why do you show so much respect versus some attorneys will just dog them out?
Well, there's a couple of reasons why, right? The first is it's got to be to the benefit of my client, right? So if I think that's to the benefit of my client to take a certain approach, I am going to do it more often, if not entirely. Another thing is too, people talk about, oh, I'm going to be an aggressive, I'm going to go in there. You need an aggressive attorney. Well, you do, but you need to know what you're doing, right? You're not just going to go in there swinging hammers in the dark, right? You want to go in with a scalpel with some precision. And that comes from experience. That comes from being able to ration and reason in your own life and be able to look at a situation, although we have a role as representing the criminally accused, but to try and look at it objectively and say, okay, how can we get the message across here, right? Because unquestionably, cross-examination of a certain officer who is alleged to have done something wrong to my client or did something wrong to my client is going to be a different tone than an officer that actually might help us, right? So you want to look, what do we want to get out of this witness? How does this witness benefit our client? And if I'm going to go in there, bulldog style and all aggressive with the cop who's going to give us good stuff, why? Right? To play the part, but it's also important though to actually have that conversation with your client and say, listen, this is what we're trying to accomplish from this officer. This is why I talked to the DA that way. We're not laying down. Believe me, we're not laying down. But there's a certain strategy behind it, right? And that comes from familiarity with the process. That comes from familiarity with the key players. So certain judges don't like that. Certain judges may like more decorum and maybe more no snarky remarks and just ask your question and sit down. Other judges allow you to get away with certain things, right? But I think communication with the client's really important too. So you can say, hey, the reason why I didn't go after that cop the way you may have wanted me to, the way your mom may have wanted me to, the way the community may have wanted to, because that's not going to benefit you in this case.
So do you find that the reason why you're able to get such ideal outcomes for your clients is because you take this approach versus the bulldog approach? Maybe the bulldog approach works 20% of the time, but your approach of finesse and decorum works has a way higher percentage of chance of getting the ideal outcome? Preparation,
ration, and experience works 100% of the time. And it's with those three things that you could selectively say, okay, I'm not, no one's going to walk over a client here, But again, it doesn't need to be this dramatic jump up and yelling and screaming and all these other things, because if you know your arena and you know where we're at, right? Prosecutor could be saying anything and everything they want, way out of line, right? And I can have my own opinions, what I may say behind closed doors, what I may say in my house, what I may say in my office about that individual. But if it's not going to benefit the client in that moment, I could tell certain judges they're going to handle it, right? I don't need to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, right, to prove a point. It's about making sure we're representing our clients the right way. And that's what a lot of people don't get. That's what a lot of younger or inexperienced or desperate attorneys don't get, is they try marketing a certain way, but they don't have the experience or the rationale or the reputation to back it up. You know, if I'm going in there screaming and yelling at every single time, that's going to get drowned out, right? Since 2007, if I'm doing that day in, day out, multiple days a week in San Diego, they're going to get tired of that act. And we see it. We see it when certain defense attorneys or even certain prosecutors have a certain shtick that they do. Just drown out, right? It gets old, it gets stale, it gets annoying. More importantly, it's not effective for the person you're representing.
Having a respectful relationship with the prosecutor, the DA, does that actually help when negotiating terms for your client?
Yeah, I mean, all else being equal, right? If they're going to give out a certain number of deals a day, right, or if they're going to bend a certain way for somebody, you want to have that mutual respect, right? It doesn't always have to necessarily be being nice, right? There are some prosecutors I've worked with that they probably have nothing nice to say about me. I probably have nothing nice to say about them, but we've been able to resolve difficult cases because of that mutual respect, in the sense that they know what I say, we're going to be able to back it up, right? And they know that if when I say, hey, listen, this is as low as we're going to go, otherwise we'll fight it, we'll try it, we'll litigate it, whatever the case may be. There's a history there. And more important than me, it's a history with the firm to back that up, right? And it's not this dramatic, like, oh, I'll see you in court. We're going to go to trial. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. It's like, there's no need for all that theatrics, unless that benefits the actual individual.
When have you seen an attorney be too aggressive and have it blow up in their face?
Every day.
Every day.
Every single day, somebody's acting a fool. Someone's trying to, play for the, you see that saying a lot of times. You see it in politics, like, oh, they're not giving an interview to anyone but one person, right? Whether it's a president, a former president, whatever, right? It's not about politics, but you see sometimes attorneys that lose sight of the big picture and throw it all away because they're going to put their credibility on the line when they know they have nothing to back it up, and they're going to go over the top. And then think about that, right? If that's your only experience with that individual, 3 years later, you see them, what are you going to remember? How are you going to view them by? And that's the important thing, right? That's the important thing that a lot of people don't understand, is that everything that you try and build goes away with one bad moment, right? And that's true, well, at least hopefully not true for our clients, right? We try and bring them back, right? Because they're more than their worst day, right? Our whole thing is regaining control of your future and hopefully keeping your freedom, right? But you see that with attorneys, is that all it takes, that uniform is always on. A good friend of mine told me that one time, and it stuck with me. And that means in court, right? People are watching what you're doing, especially as an attorney, especially as a leader. And if you act like a fool one time, everybody who saw you are going to think less of you. And even worse, if they don't know you, that's all they're going to know of you, right? So every single day we see that mistake being made in court.
Yeah. Reputation takes years to build and one day to tear down.
100. It takes one email to tear down. It takes one email to tear down. And that's the thing too. It's like that's what, it's hard for a client or a potential client to do all that research, right? When you get arrested on a Thursday and you got court on Monday, right? But it's one of those things that if there was a way to sort of freeze time and really dig in, it would be like, look, how stable is that attorney you're hiring? What's their reputation, right? Well, you don't want someone who's, every DA has something nice to say about them. But if court staff, judges, if they're like, hey, loose cannon, stay away, no credibility, right? Everything's a hassle. Everything's couldn't meet a continuance that they couldn't mess up or drag out.
I want to debunk a myth real quick. I thought like white collar crimes were just like total slap on the wrist. Like you just like steal pennies from millions of people, make millions of dollars, and just be like, go to Club Fed for a few years, you're good. Can we debunk that myth that white collar crimes are like? Because then it's Sam Bankman-Fried, he got like 25 years.
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about millions upon millions upon millions of dollars, right? I mean, that's a significant amount of time that you're facing. A lot of times, especially in state court, what we'll see is there's a loss, whether it's from an employee, the victim being the employer, right? Or whether it's, setting up a nonprofit and not using the money how you're supposed to, whatever the case may be. You're dealing $30,000, $40,000, $200,000, $300,000, right? You're not really getting into the wire fraud, money laundering, federal aspect of it. You're dealing in state court. There's still that despite what everyone will say, you can buy a better deal. Not in the sense of no one's, at least we're not. And I certainly hope no one else is nowadays, at least, giving money to anyone for bribery or whatever, right? But when I say buy a better outcome, it goes by way of restitution, right? So all else being equal, the client who's like, hey, you know what? I'm accused of misappropriating $200,000, but I'm going to come to the table with 100 of it right up front and, try and negotiate a better outcome so I could keep that job or get that job and pay it off quicker. You're going to, more often than not, you're going to get that better deal for that client, as opposed to someone who's like went through the 200,000, blew it, it's got nothing left, got nothing to bring to the table. It's a negotiating piece as well. It's unfortunate because a lot of times these are people who ripped off people who really, a dollar to them may mean nothing to the person that actually did the ripping off. But yeah, there's people doing legit time for white collar stuff. Still not as much as what some people think, but definitely more than what we've seen in the last couple of years.
Because you hear a lot of recently with the PPP loans, and that's probably more federal. We hear the PPP fraud, the COVID relief fraud.
What we saw starting around 2023, we saw a decent number of PPP fraud cases coming through where clients their businesses were raided or they were reached out to, whether it's, IRS, whether it's the Attorney General, whether it's whatever the case may be, state or federal. Some of it was clear cut, just rip off city, making stuff up, right? The old days of stated income loans. And it's like, okay, cool. I really qualify for $1 million house, but, my wife's, esthetician business nets $6.2 million a year. So now I'm going to buy this great house that I'm going to get. And then the second mortgage payment, I'm going to default, right? We saw a lot of that in the mid 2000s. The stuff that we've seen, some of it has really been unfortunate too, because it's been business owners that were getting the PPP money and were actually paying their employees, but they weren't doing it through payroll. So it was situations where they qualify for it, they got it, but they didn't necessarily run that money then through payroll. They were still paying their employees. And the reason why they were doing that, because their employees were going to them and said, hey, if you don't pay me in cash, I'm just going to leave because I could get all this COVID relief money myself or unemployment and all that. So I'd rather just, take me off the books, but pay me, off the books in cash. So some of the people that we have seen and represented, it wasn't like they were living this lavish lifestyle with this PPP or SBA idle money. It was they were doing it as a necessity to keep their business afloat and were still paying their employees. Arguably, their employees were the ones that were raking them over the coals to get them in this mess to begin with. But, that sort of tailed off a little bit, but we're going to see more and more of it. And the issue is right. There's a difference between, overstating something or making a mistake, and then the ability to pay back that money versus people that in some of these gigantic corporations, millions upon millions upon millions of dollars, when small business owners were going under, when all they really needed was about 13 grand to stay afloat.